Is the cannabis culture in Ridgefield's future? Here is what voters need to know about Ridgefield's proposed cannabis ordinance. In preparation for public hearings July 13 and August 17, and a town meeting on September 7th. The cannabis bill Governor Lamont signed into law in June of last year gave municipalities the authority to prohibit or to regulate cannabis establishments either by town ordinance or by zoning regulations. Even though Ridgefield already had in place a zoning regulation that prohibited the dispensing and growing or producing both medical and recreational marijuana, that was approved in 2015 when medical marijuana was legalized but before recreational cannabis was legalized. In September of last year, on advice of council, Planning and Zoning passed a one-year moratorium that complied with language in the new cannabis law, giving the Board of Selectmen time to digest the cannabis regulation and to gauge the public's desire to permit or prohibit these previously prohibited businesses from coming to Ridgefield. After not one, not two, but 3 public information hearings where the Board of Selectmen exhausted public interest in and input on the topic of permitting local cannabis businesses, both medical and recreational, they passed a town policy. Here are clips of that discussion.
Now that I think of it, back into those meetings I had in September, I think it was, they said, we want to hear input from the Board of Selectmen. Again, I kind of took that as probably everyone else did, that, you know, they were saying, okay, it's up to the Board of Selectmen to make the decision.
They did say that. They said that the Board of Selectmen is responsible for setting a policy.
Yes.
Right.
And if the Board of Selectmen says no, then that's the policy of the town. I think if the Board of Selectmen establishes a policy with a no vote, they will accept that as meaning the town does not want to move forward. End of issue.
Right. I mean, that's the way I've read it so far.
Yep. And then that gives the opportunity for people to go and petition and raise the 1,700 signatures, whatever the 10% is. I think Wayne said we had 17,000 roughly.
Right.
Registered voters now.
I've heard very, and amazingly strong opinions, you know, on sort of both sides, and I was just able to come to one session that we had here on a Saturday morning, which was clearly the larger one, and it was somewhat balanced. I think towards the end there was clearly more of a feeling towards no, but again there were plenty. I think I had 8 people or so who very passionately talked about, you know, the need to have it.
When we first started our Community Coalition Against Alcohol and Substance Abuse, it was after a young man, 21 years old, died of an overdose on Main Street, heroin overdose. And it was a shock. You know, Main Street, Ridgefield, kind of brought a sense of reality to it. We're looking at taking money from something that we've worked so hard to try and keep our kids, especially with alcohol. I mean, the years, and it's still #1 in the schools. Vaping is running a very close second, and we all know that the oils that are out there, the THC content could be crazy. I mean, it's almost an hallucinogenic drug, and you don't want your kids getting behind the wheel with that kind of stuff on the street. And I do think that a store in our community, a dispensary, would certainly allow for a greater presence of it in our town, because what we have found that many of the kids who are at that younger age are getting it from an older sibling. I see that same type of behavior opening up in the community, and I think if we have an opportunity to help stop that, that we should make every effort to do so. So that's where I'm coming from. Barbara, you wanted to say something?
But in terms of going into the business of it, and having it as a presence on our main street when the kids are coming out of school on a Friday afternoon and coming down Main Street, Rudy, you're right. It's everything we fought against.
Why don't we just have the motion be that the Ridgefield Board of Selectmen hereby establishes a policy not to allow any form of cannabis to be legally
Any form of cannabis business, is what you're saying.
business to be established in the town of Ridgefield.
That's what they were trying to get to.
How about that?
That's exactly right, business.
So we have a motion,
A second.
Barbara, seconded by Maureen. If there's no further comment, all in favor? Aye. Barbara?
Aye.
Nays? One nay. Motion carries.
On April 25th, First Selectman Marconi sent the Planning and Zoning Commission a letter conveying the Board of Selectmen's policy decision and reasoning. The following evening of April 26, he reminds the Commission that they asked for guidance and briefed the Commission on that guidance in person.
The Planning and Zoning Commission suggested that this is a policy decision that should be debated by the Board of Selectmen and decided there. If we were to say, yes, we want to move forward, we would send it back to P&Z to establish the regulation, location, and all the other variables that would go into that decision. If we said no on the policy, that would establish that decision. It turned out to be pretty interesting. We did hold 3 public hearings. First one, we had 4 people, the second 8, and the third about 22. It was interesting. The majority of people were against. There were some that felt it should go to a referendum. I consulted with counsel on that. Basically, it came down to 3 basic decisions we had to make. And I think Rob sent out the letter I sent that explained that we are not allowed to call a referendum on an opinion question. It would be 14 different areas. We had our discussion. The opinion of the Board of Selectmen was to vote to establish a policy. They would rather not even bother going to a referendum, that we establish a policy at that meeting, last meeting, which we voted. The motion was approved 4-1, 4 in favor of a no use policy. 1 person voted against the motion, which was the reason for it. He felt it should have gone to a referendum. And that's what is basically said in this letter here, explaining those 3 different alternatives that we had. And that's where we're at. But the Board of Selectmen voted not establish a regulation for marijuana in any of the uses. So it's a quick overview, but I'm not going to go on and be repetitious relative to a policy, which is what the P&Z Commission
In
has.
your opinion, does that obviate the need for any kind of action on the part of the planning and zoning?
Well, I would say that's a discussion of the Planning and Zoning Commission. However, I would respectfully ask that you take the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen.
After 2 planning and zoning meetings where no action was taken by the Commission, with the moratorium end looming in the not-too-distant future, the Board of Selectmen began the process of adopting a town ordinance.
And the next 4B has to do with the cannabis ordinance. I have spoken with the chair of planning and zoning. The expiration on the moratorium is September 24th. They voted for 1 year. The reason that I brought it forward to begin with, if you recall, I went to the planning and zoning
Right.
expecting them to motion and second, which they did, based on the Board of Selectmen's vote.
It would also seem to me that even if they are going to consider it, we should be advancing in parallel, because September 24th is the end of the moratorium, and we can't rely on P&Z having, even if they give.
Meeting the deadlines.
Yeah.
My concern is that the end result will not be what the overwhelming consensus is of the Board of Selectmen. P&Z referred it back to us for policy. We set the policy. It's not been adhered to. There was a motion put and a second, and they decided to table it. It hasn't come back, and that concerns me. It concerns a majority of the people in this town, and that's why we would move forward with an ordinance. So I'll have a motion to entertain that the Board of Selectmen set 2 dates for a public hearing of July 13th and August 17th, with a town meeting on September 7th for the purpose of passing, or for the purpose of
enacting,
a cannabis ordinance in the town of Ridgefield,
right.
prohibiting.
I'll make the motion. As stated.
I'll second. I'll second.
So we have a motion made and seconded, Bob and Barbara. Any further debate? There being none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 4-0.
A 4-page plus ordinance to be enacted in a town meeting on September the 7th, 2022, prohibits the establishment, installation, creation, or use of cannabis establishments, including recreational and palliative, in the town of Ridgefield. When planning and zoning prohibited medical and recreational marijuana in 2015, they listed 6 reasons, for the record, that are equally valid today. It prevents applicants from applying under other uses. Cannabis remains a Schedule I substance prohibited under federal law. State licenses are limited to serve population areas. There are state licensed facilities convenient to Ridgefield. The evidence of benefits are inconclusive, and the experience of other states are both positive and negative. That said, we have heard from people who think that the town should welcome cannabis to Ridgefield. They fall roughly into 3 groups. Those libertarians who believe that government governs best, that governs least, and should butt out of adults making such decisions for themselves, no matter the impact on children or the social and economic costs. Those who are enamored with cannabis, either for pleasure or for profit. And finally, those who see dollar signs as a windfall in taxes for Ridgefield. If you were in the first 2 groups, this presentation is unlikely to change your mind. But if you are in the third group, this presentation is intended to break the spell of the chump change bribe that is being dangled by the state. The commercial opportunity of cannabis can be blinding. The jobs it promises, the storefront it could occupy, the tourism it could attract, and the taxes it could generate. But all that glitters is not gold, and all that promise can quickly evaporate into a distant mirage. The Cannabis Industry Association explains why in this excerpted video about an arcane section of the federal tax code, Section 280E, and its dire consequences in their own words.
You've probably heard about the green rush sweeping the nation. Although the cannabis plant is still federally illegal, in the 29 states plus DC where it is legal for adults or medical use, businesses are now legitimately growing it, selling it, and everything in between. You may think these businesses are swimming in profits, but what you may not know is that they're being taxed at an insanely high rate thanks to a little thing called Section 280E of the IRS tax code, making tax season for a cannabis business owner a real bummer. Imagine paying an effective tax rate 3.5 times higher than the business next door to you because you were forbidden from taking normal business deductions, such as payroll, rent, and other common costs of doing business. Cannabis dispensaries and cultivators are paying an effective tax rate of 70% or higher. By comparison, the corporate tax rate established by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 is 21%. The effect of this is that licensed cannabis businesses cannot invest as much in capital improvements or things like employee raises and benefits, hiring more employees, expanding operations, or giving back to the community. The disadvantages are numerous, from high turnover to higher prices, which drives customers back into the criminal market, and criminals don't file tax returns. Cannabis remains a Schedule I controlled substance according to the federal government, so this penalty applies to licensed cannabis businesses that operate in compliance with state laws and regulations. This means real problems for state legal cannabis businesses who are staying compliant while attempting to grow. Meanwhile, it has no effect on illegal operations that don't file tax returns. Well, cannabis businesses can't even deduct many of the costs incurred in staying compliant. To learn more, visit NCIA's website at www.thecannabisindustry.org.
2 points merit emphasis. Confiscatory taxes impair cannabis businesses from doing many good things, including giving back to the community. Lawmakers may have been naive if they thought legalizing cannabis would end the illegal marijuana trade, including the scourge of fentanyl. This is no exaggeration. How bad is it? It's so bad that California appropriated $100 million to bail out its legal pot business as it struggles to compete with the thriving illegal market. Closer to home, on June 23rd, News Times reported 3 Danbury smoke shops were busted for illegal marijuana sales. Yet Connecticut was successfully lobbied by organizations like the Marijuana Policy Project with irresistible promise of taxes, not just state and local sales taxes, but also hefty excise taxes, which are the second most regressive tax paid by Connecticut taxpayers. By 2028, the MPP projected total taxes of almost $280 million, 66% of which will be in the form of excise taxes, 23% in state sales tax, and Connecticut Town's 3% sales tax rate translates into 11 cents on the dollar of total projected cannabis taxes. But what about the cost side of the equation? The Centennial Institute of the Colorado Christian University has documented that the economic costs and social costs dwarf revenues by a factor of 4.5. But remember, 89 cents of that dollar goes to Hartford. Only 11 cents remains local, while most of the economic and social costs are borne by the community. This may be a net positive for the state, but a major shortchange for the town. And every day we learn of the increasing social costs of youthful access to products with THC levels that are 200% higher than seen just a few decades ago. Guns, which have been widely owned since well before the Bill of Rights was passed in 1791, alone can't explain the surge in mass shootings. Another common denominator that is emerging is the psychotic effects of high-potency cannabis on young males. This June 1st story from the Wall Street Journal connects these dots. Copies are available for you here. As is the New York Times report from June 23rd about high-potency products and the psychotic and addictive effects. In spite of these dangers, potency is largely unregulated. But even where it is, as in Connecticut, there is no known safe limit, and we don't have the luxury of time to educate parents and kids. The ethical equivalence of booze argument is a specious distraction. And don't think that a cannabis business would be accretive, as existing traditional good businesses will predictably flee from neighboring businesses that are incompatible with their brand. While bad business drives out good business, it attracts less attractive business. Just because a business is legal doesn't mean every Skid Row business is appropriate to every town, particularly for a town such as Ridgefield that is family-oriented, with academically rigorous schools, that is spiritually robust, intellectually curious, culturally dynamic, and where development and conservation and preservation thrive in harmony. What towns are more suited for the cannabis business? This is another kind of map showing the relative socioeconomic relationship of the 46 towns in Connecticut with a qualifying population of 25,000 or more. Median household incomes range from $36,000 to $206,000 from left to right on the horizontal axis. And the percent of adults with bachelor's degrees or higher range from 16% to 78% from the bottom to the top of the vertical axis. These two metrics are highly correlated with a coefficient of 0.87 for statisticians. 12 of the 13 towns that have appropriated cannabis zoning cluster in the lower left of less affluent, less educated towns. West Hartford is the lone outlier. 9 of these qualifying towns, including Ridgefield, have approved moratoriums spanning the socioeconomic range of towns. The 5 qualifying towns that have chosen to prohibit cannabis are generally more affluent and well-educated. Ridgefield's closest peers, Westport and Greenwich, have said no to cannabis. There are 12 other towns with populations less than 25,000 that have prohibited cannabis, including New Canaan and Weston, and Wilton is still under a moratorium. We are dangerously and speedily approaching the end of the road when the current moratorium expires on September 24th. There is simply no more time left to squander. Please help keep Ridgefield the kind of town in which you want to live, work, play, and prosper. Remember, we need your help by voting yes for the proposed Ridgefield Cannabis Ordinance at the town meeting on Wednesday, September 7th. Thank you.